Good afternoon, everyone. I too would like to acknowledge the Yawuru traditional owners, thank David and Emma and the team for putting on such a wonderful event, and while I'm at it, also I guess acknowledge and thank the people of Broome and the Shire here for making available such a wonderful venue. I'm going to try and skip through this fairly quickly, and just for the purpose of trying to increase the level of awareness in terms of what DPIRD is trying to do in the north. I think we've been through a period of time where the department has struggled for resources, at times lost focus in some areas of its business. I'm going to be particularly focused on the economic development side of our business, and then Michelle will be up shortly to talk about some of the work that she's doing and also to talk about the review of the Animal Welfare Act. Everyone knows that the state government went through a fairly disruptive period with the change of government, resulting in various mergers and what have you. We didn't escape that, but I'm pleased to say we're coming through it and looking outward, upward and out into the future. And with that has come an opportunity to continue to review our focus in the north. And really we're about trying to identify a number of strategic programs that are of relevance to the industry. And with that, of course, the relationships that we have with you are incredibly important in terms of shaping that investment. And, you know, we're pretty lucky to have Minister McTiernan working for us. I mean, he's a minister who's interested in your sector. He's a minister who's enabled us to secure some resources and to increase our presence in the north and to continue to design our program of activities despite the focus of the last couple of years around budget repair. The Northern Beef Development Program has really three key focus areas. Business improvement delivered through the business improvement grants, mosaic agriculture including the sterile Lakina project and agronomy trials, and we've heard a bit about those in the last couple of days, and productivity and capacity building, including for the department, a renewed involvement in extension and adoption and industry support activities. I just want to shine a light on the two of these areas, particularly the business improvement grants and the other project that was initiated up here in the north, the Twilight Forums. The business improvement grants, the thing I like about them is they're, and I think not so much that I like about it, but the feedback we get is we're very flexible about how they can be applied. So the business improvement grants make available to applicants $25,000 to engage some professional advice, do a bit of planning, and then a further $15,000 to activate those plans. You might say, well, you know, why would the government be handing out cheques like that? Of course, people are happy to receive them. And really it's about trying to, again, the focus of this event being on innovation, it's trying to accelerate innovation. So it's trying to give people the opportunity to do that extra thing that they might like to do but haven't got around to getting after, or haven't had the motivation to devote some extra resources to that in order to improve their business. So the program has delivered more than $1.3 million in grants across 68 family, corporate and Indigenous enterprises, utilising those grants for a range of improvement areas. The current round of grants will conclude after the 2020 season, and we're currently looking at how to make the most of this program, and then we'll do some evaluation and see if we can continue it into the future. But that adaptive nature of the program is revealed in terms of the broad scope of projects that have been initiated. We've seen water infrastructure projects with 19% of the funding, nutrition 19%, weigh equipment 14%, herd recording software 14%, DNA testing 6%, and pain relief 2%. So, you know, that program is coming to an end, and we will be looking at how we build a business case for a continuation of that offering. The other one that was interesting, and I don't think we necessarily understand how, or maybe the industry up here might not appreciate how lucky you are to have been able to work with DPIRD as somebody who can work with you to arrange these Twilight Forums. And for those of you who don't know what the Twilight Forums are all about, there's a couple of things that are worth noting. One is they're not currently in place in any other part of the state, so it's something that's been created locally and been embraced locally here in the northern rangelands. The southern rangelands are doing it tough at the moment, and I've got to say I'm feeling a little exposed to the Minister at the moment as to why we haven't got a similar program running down in the south, but the industry has really responded well to the idea of identifying a station to host an event, and if you're within 3 hours drive of that station, then you'd be invited to the event. And the whole idea is to try to access and share expertise and insights around common and shared issues or opportunities, and often that expertise is in your own backyard. The Twilight Forums have been really well attended. Over 150 forums from over 40 stations have attended 8 of these forums, and the topics have included calculating breeder mortality and phosphorus supplementation, forage budgeting to measure feed on offer, using satellite imagery to enhance decision making, grazing irrigate roads grass, among others. So again, this is something that we trust that is valued, and we certainly value the connection we have with industry in being able to help arrange those events. And I do just want to re-emphasise the importance of relationship for the department as it continues to rebuild its program in the north. The relationship with the KPSA is very important in relation to that work program. We down in Perth are remote from your business. We've got lots of competing priorities, and we really rely on our staff who are present here to maintain connection at grassroots in terms of what's important for you. And that partnership has also extended to our ability to stand up a dry season response, the work that Megan Barnes is leading at the moment in trying to engage in a very transparent and open debate around the Fitzroy Valley Management Plan. Another example, working with Meat and Livestock Australia in relation to the pilot phosphorus challenge. All of these things are only made possible through the collaboration that exists between our agency, other agencies that we work with, and your industry. I do want to make a few comments about the Aboriginal Pastoral Estate and the work that we're endeavouring to do there. The Minister this morning pointed to a couple of animal welfare events that we've had, which really shone the spotlight on the opportunity for us to do more work with the Indigenous enterprises that are running these properties. Last year, I think we got to about a quarter of those properties with our Aboriginal Economic Development team. This year, we've got to 70% of them. And we're looking for early engagement. We're looking to understand the challenges that these properties face in terms of challenges in their pastoral operations, challenges in their governance arrangements, and also seasonal factors. And the early engagement has allowed us to get on the ground and help station body corporates, prescribed body corporates where that's relevant, but effectively the leaseholder, to consider the options as to either remain in direct operation and control of the property, or to move through and look at different options around sublease, joint venture arrangements, adjustment, and so on. And earlier this year, we published the Setting Up for Success guide to help these businesses understand how they might bring additional expertise into the property. The other thing we've been doing with the Aboriginal training program, the Aboriginal properties, is looking at, not just the Aboriginal properties, but the industry more broadly is looking at an Aboriginal training program. In May this year, Minister McTiernan hosted a Pilbara Aboriginal Pastoral Forum involving around 60 participants, including 13 Aboriginal pastoral properties. And this forum really did inspire the idea of developing a pastoral training for Aboriginal people program, really to target opportunities to work in the northern cattle industry, where 15% of workers are currently Aboriginal. So that program is currently being developed. The aim will be to enable participants to obtain high quality skills, assist them to retain employment in the industry, or use the training as a stepping stone to other employment in the region. And it's intended to be run as residential camps across three properties in the Pilbara, the East and West Kimberley next year. The other areas where the department's been particularly active has been in irrigation. I'll get to the Ord a little bit later, but in the West Kimberley, in the Pilbara, we've seen various stakeholders, from the miners to entrepreneurial individuals looking to develop irrigated agricultural opportunities there in what have got to be some of the most remote, complex and costly regions to operate in. And the government's been there for quite some time alongside, from 2005 to 2019, supporting those projects and supporting those growth opportunities, and we'll be continuing to do more work in that area. And I'll get to the Transforming Agriculture in the Pilbara project shortly. Some of the work that's been presented previously by Clinton Revell and Chris Ham and their team are also highlighting the sort of work that we're doing. I do need to quickly touch on the cultivation of non-Indigenous plant species on pastoral leases. This is an area that the department has come under, I think, some criticism as to, and it's not just an issue for our department, it involves the Pastoral Lands Board, involves DBCA and the Department of Water. There's quite a complex framework at the moment in terms of how advice is provided to the Pastoral Lands Board and how the Pastoral Lands Board considers that advice in relation to the use of non-Indigenous species. And of course, we have to find that balance between finding productive opportunities to increase the productivity of the industry while also balancing weed risk. But there is a recognition that we may not have the balance right, and so what's been happening over the last couple of months is we've put a revised framework to the Pastoral Lands Board, looking at streamlining how the interagency advice comes together and how that advice is assessed, and also recognising the independence of the Pastoral Lands Board in terms of how it frames and makes its decisions, provided those decisions wouldn't involve a recommendation for use of a particular plant variety that might be otherwise banned through other legislation. So that revised framework has been put through the design process. It will be tested with a case study over the next coming weeks and into the end of the year, with a view to the Pastoral Lands Board and the relevant agencies getting increased comfort that this revised approach is workable and is balanced, and hopefully provides a little more opportunity for the use of non-natives with appropriate controls. Once we've gone through that process of assessing that case study, we'll be back in front of industry to consult on what the framework looks like, on the basis that the agencies feel that there's some upside there. So look, it takes time. We've been recipients of some criticism in this area for being perhaps too conservative on the one hand, but on the other hand having to uphold our responsibilities in relation to weed risk and the like. So that's one to watch. Look, on the Ord, there's been a lot of speculation recently about the possibility of a cotton industry in the Ord. That's something that we're very interested in and involved in. DPIRD is the agency with environmental proponency for the Ord River development. We've got responsibilities around managing environmental impacts, the conditions that are placed on the Ord Stage 2 development, the management of things like tail water and keeping it out of the tail water being the surplus water at the bottom of the irrigation system, keeping it out of the Keep River National Park and the like. But right now, a lot of our focus is on supporting the establishment of a cotton industry in the East Kimberley. We've been interested that there are investors who are looking to ramp up fairly aggressively. That brings some challenges and risks with it. To move from where we are today, running trials of some several hundreds of hectares to a 20,000 hectare cotton industry is a fair leap. It has got a lot of challenges, requires some R&D support, it requires some infrastructure support, and we've been steadily increasing our presence in Kununurra. We appointed Professor David McNeill as Senior Research Scientist in July at the Frank Wise Research Institute, and we will have a new Senior Entomologist commencing there in Kununurra in the coming months, and we've been investing in new capital and research equipment within that facility. And in just the space of 18 months, we've seen about that research station, about 20% of its land capacity was in use prior to this new renewed investment. We're now fully utilised this particular season in terms of the the use of the facility and the trials that are underway. And why is that relevant to the cattle industry? Well, you know that better than I. The cotton industry might give us 100, maybe $200 million of added value. There's at least that again in terms of the potential for the cotton industry to supply cotton seed and fibre into the cattle industry for feed. And there is a lot of work that's been done around trying to understand how we manage biosecurity controls to move cattle and cotton between the borders, and Michelle may say something about that shortly. I did say I'd mention, and this is my last point, and it is late in the day, but I did say I wanted to just cover off on transforming agriculture in the Pilbara, and we've got our team here, Chris and the team, who are actively involved in that. And again, this is another example of a project where historically it might have been managed from down in Perth or the southwest. The Northern Beef Development Project, the TAP project, have got people deployed into the regions to manage this work with appropriate support down south. The key objectives of TAP are to prove up soil and water resources for potentially irrigated agriculture in the Pilbara. This program builds upon similar projects undertaken in the West Kimberley over the past 10 years and is integrated with the Northern Beef Development and Irrigated Agriculture programs. They're involved in land and water resource assessment, economic analysis and business support, and irrigation research and development. We're undertaking a groundwater census across the Shaw River, the Lower De Grey, Newman and Karratha hinterland investigation areas, and these have identified a diverse range of opportunities. TAP has commissioned an irrigation research and development site at the Martu Farm in Newman on horticultural opportunities, with, believe it or not, a focus on the establishment of stone fruit and table grapes to appraise their performance in this part of the Pilbara, where winters may have enough chill accumulation to enable successful production of these crops. The program has also undertaken an airborne electromagnetic survey at Newman to characterise the groundwater aquifer as part of a managed aquifer recharge scheme concept. DPID is also working with CSIRO to conduct a surface water analysis of the De Grey River Basin, the largest and most reliable river in the Pilbara, to determine water use opportunities. And planning is also underway for soil surveys to commence in the De Grey Basin in 2020. So there's just a few highlights of the activities of the economic development pillar within the department. And I've got to say that where we were just 3 years ago is a very different place from where we are now, even though these projects have had their genesis some time back. There was one time there where I think Emma Northern Beef was being run out of the southwest, which was less than acceptable to the new management or to our minister. So it's good to see those that local presence being built. So with that, I might ask Michelle to come up and just add her commentary. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity to talk today. My talk will have a bit of an animal theme, but I am actually representing the whole biosecurity area, so I will struggle my way through some cotton consultation for border movement and attempt to ask you questions. And I guess most of the things about border control is really around risk mitigation, and it really doesn't matter if it's sort of cotton or whether it's animals, the same sort of a process applies. So in the new department, Nigel mentioned that we've sort of quite changed where we are, but where we were. Biosecurity still is one of the main priorities in the department, and we've just completed our structure, and it still is a large component, and similar to the regional development areas, it's actually got an increased presence now, and I'll go through some of that at the end of my talk. The biosecurity area still includes the laboratory. Western Australia made a key decision that we would keep a local laboratory. Very difficult to get samples tested and back from the eastern states as a priority in a timely way, and we do all of our export testing, primarily all of our disease rule-outs, all of our sort of key ARGT testing and everything all in our lab. The invasive species program is still a major investment recognised by security groups, developing all through the regions and into the ag region as well. They've been in the north for a long period of time. The plant biosecurity program has got significant increased investment in it, and the animal biosecurity program now includes aquatic biosecurity and animal welfare as well. So I guess one of the new things that we've done in the last couple of years is do what we call a biosecurity intelligence platform. It was piloted in the animal biosecurity area first, and it really goes to some of the themes that Cass was talking about earlier around having the verification for our market access, and we never really had a proper database to keep it all in, and so it was very clunky to try and get the data to verify your properties for export certification and even for box-based certification. So we used to do a quarterly, well, we still do a quarterly report, but we sort of had to hand do it all the time and send it off to the Commonwealth. Now we have our own database that will compile that. So this year, that biosecurity intelligence platform has enabled us to do 13,000 property of origin health certifications for your export. And in that, there is about 700 cattle and 5,280 sheep, and obviously semen, genetics, box product, feed, horses, and a range of other things that we certify for. So now that platform is being used for plant biosecurity as well, we're just changing some of the parameters and metadata in it, and we're using it for invasive species. So it really will be the database that the department goes forward on, and a long overdue business investment. Cass talked about some of the surveillance and obviously the NAMP program, and I just really want to say, I suppose, that the NAMP program is an industry and government investment, like a number of our targeted surveillance program. It costs over $1 million, and the majority of that money comes from industry, but it is critical for your blue tongue zone and markets for cattle and sheep for Indonesia, Israel and China. And you know, without your support in those targeted surveillance programs, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. We've just enhanced some of our monitoring around that to try and, we've been negotiating with China to try and get some better access, and we did need to do some additional surveillance to meet some of their conditions. You did ask me to talk about Johne's disease. I think I remember well the Broome day back in 2012 or whenever it was, and I came up with Kevin Chanel. I don't know if many of you remember that. But at the time, obviously, we'd had an incursion into, or traces from Queensland into Western Australia, and we had 6 properties in the north that were at risk. And at the time, we met with industry and gave them 3 options: to deregulate JD, to zone the north off from the south, or to continue to regulate it, and the decision was made by industry to continue to regulate it. Since then, as you know, that nationally we've deregulated Johne's disease, and Western Australia has asked as an industry to continue to regulate the border to minimise the risk of Johne's disease coming in. So as part of that, the industry ran a surveillance program, because we can't regulate borders unless we've got evidence that we don't have the diseases here. So we've just completed that surveillance, and it was commissioned by the Industry Management Committee on behalf of the industry. That will go to their committee meeting next week. We have put preliminary data out before, which basically had said that we didn't detect any C strain, but we have found the sheep strain in cattle, and that still is the case. So at the end of it, it will still be like that. And I guess now it really is for us to determine what we want for border biosecurity going forward from now. So thank you to all those properties that participated in that. It was a little hard to get the last couple of properties done, which is why it's gone on for so long. I don't think I'll talk about the NABS program, except to say that it's been a really critical activity across the north to get where an area's got a low population of of people and staffing to actually have everyone to be part of that surveillance network. And so Cass mentioned the kits and the network that's been developed in the north and the training programs that have been run up here as part of the Commonwealth White Paper money. I'll mention interstate import requirements because we are in the process of reviewing them, and we've got a draft paper which we'll put to the cattle and sheep consultative group in the next week or so. I guess with the JD deregulation in the eastern states, there's no MAP program or regulated program anymore on the east coast, and so it becomes increasingly difficult for us to manage the risk of Johne's disease in entering the state. And I guess for anyone that, I think Angus mentioned that this region's quite dependent on Indonesia, which is Johne's disease sensitive, it actually is quite a critical issue for you to be able to actually make some business decisions about what level of regulation you want the state government to put in place and what level of regulation you want to put or control you actually want to manage on a property by property basis. So we are reviewing those interstate import requirements. One of the main focuses will be on JD, and we're starting with cattle, and so we will be consulting in the next few months about that. Entry of cotton into WA. Currently cotton seed is not permitted entry into WA, mainly because of some cotton wilt diseases and also prohibited weed seeds, which are of concern environmentally. The setting of import conditions will allow it to come in, which will mean you'll have conditions to enter. And some of those conditions may be that wherever they go to, so if it's a processing plant, is a permanent quarantine facility, and there'll be conditions about how imported cotton is managed there. So the industry consultation period has happened. It commenced on the 30th of August, was for a 3-week period. And in general, the written feedback was positive from industry to want to bring cotton into the state. And the department's now considering the feedback and will draft the import conditions and then have a 60-day consultation period with our jurisdictional counterparts as well to see how they react to the conditions that will be set. So I think, you know, there's different ways that it can be done. One is that you put all the risk mitigation at the actual farm that it's being sent from, or the other is that you have the risk mitigation largely at the processing plant and actually require destruction of the trash and that at that point at the plant. So the plant biosecurity group are working through that, and we'll get that done in the relatively near future, but I guess it will be a little while off because I don't think the processing plant's imminent. Traceability, you will all know or have heard of the issues with blue tongue disease in Victoria, where they've still, even today, haven't got their market back to China out of that region. And a lot of that issue was around incorrect traceability of animals, and animals being thought to have come from regions that they actually hadn't come from. So it's been a national focus for, since then, it'll be a few years back now, probably 3, I think, years ago, and has led to a whole national traceability project, which actually went through admin just in the last few weeks, the endorsed, and that went out for public consultation. I know a number of you had comment on that, and that document is now out and available on the website. And I think a number of industries have actually already taken action to strengthen their traceability arrangements as part of that arrangements. At the moment, there is a consultation out for property identifiers. That closes on the 15th of November. We have written to all the animal sector around what that means for them, but it is now going to be expanded to include non-livestock sectors, including grain and horticulture. And so that consultation, if you want to make comment on that, it does close soon, and it's meant to have an agreed PIC business rules by the end of 2019. That would seem ambitious to me. And then whatever that's decided, to have legislation changes by the end of 2022. Animal Welfare Act review. A number of you I know have been engaged in this, the independent panel. is to review the Animal Welfare Act 2002. It's a relatively clunky and old act, and it definitely needs reviewing. There's a panel chaired by Linda Black, and the members of the panel have a range of veterinary animal welfare and industry experience. The aim is to assess the operation and effectiveness of the Act, including whether it reflects best practice and what legislation amendments might be required. It's had 4 meetings. It's met with agencies that enforce the Act, RSPCA, local government, other organ, police, and commenced a 6-week public consultation, and that closes on the 25th of November, and I do know that the KPCA, I think, have asked for an extension on that, which has been agreed. There is 4 public forums. They're planned for Broome on the 26th of November, Karratha on the 28th of November, Katanning 31st of January, and Perth on the 3rd of February next year. And then the panel will produce a series of discussion papers and hold stakeholder meetings. The panel then expects to hold in-person meetings with key stakeholders, KPCA, WA Farmers, PGA, and they're hoping to get a report to the Minister by June 2020. So relatively ambitious timeframe, and if it's anything like the Animal Protection Bill in the Northern Territory, there will be a wealth of interested stakeholders that will wish to make comment on the papers and discussions that go out. Standards and guidelines. So as I think may have been mentioned earlier, in November last year, the Act was amended to enable the making of regulations to give effect to the current animal welfare standards, and the first ones that are going to be done are the land transport standards and standards on sale yards and depots. And the reason they're being done together is because basically they're sort of interrelated in many ways. The published standards, land transport standards and sale yard depot standards, they'll be adopted as is, as a code of practice, and then the department has also started the process of drafting regulations that give effect to them. So the actual standards won't be up for consultation because they're already agreed, but what's written in the regulations will be up for consultation. So the consultative draft is meant to be finished by the end of November, and then it will go out for a 10-week consultation period to give people time to comment on that. So again, I don't know, end of November doesn't seem very far away, but if it gets too close to Christmas, they may extend that consultation period because it's pretty hard to get people to consult over that time period. The Vet Practice Bill. The Vet Practice Bill, I've been in government a long time, and I think that's been under development ever since I've been there, but so the Vet Practice Bill is actually up to draft 4. Prior to this government coming to effect, I think it was on draft 11, and the new government's under draft 4. But those drafting instructions, our minister has prioritised this. It's got a priority through the Parliamentary Council. Draft 4 should be ready by the end of this year with consultation early 2020, with an ambitious target of introduction in the first half and passage in the first half of 2020 as well. So we will aim to try and meet those conditions. Obviously, for those in the north, there's been a lot of interest around authorised persons to undertake acts of veterinary surgery. These will link to the standards and guidelines, but in the past around spaying and preg testing and things like that. So those capacities will be in there, and like I said, linking to the current animal welfare standards and guidelines. I will talk about African swine fever, and I guess not so much that I don't really think African swine fever is a significant concern to the cattle industry. We can never predict exactly what our trading partners will do. But as Angus mentioned, there's a significant protein shortage at the moment, and we're being approached already by Singapore to actually put conditions in place to continue to trade with them with pork should we get African swine fever, and if we can put zoning and things in place. So there is, and that's just because they're desperate for a protein. So I think it really depends on the trading environment that you're in, exactly how your trading partners will react. But if logic was there, it should not impact the cattle industry. But I guess I put this up because no matter what disease it is, the same type of process will be used. And what we found with ASF is as the risk has become very real to the pig industry, we became very aware that they weren't as across some of these things that perhaps we thought they might have been. So it will be responded to under the Emergency Animal Disease Response Agreement, which would be the same for any disease if it was in the cattle industry or anything like that that's pre-agreed. So foot and mouth disease is one of those diseases. We've got pre-agreed arrangements in that deed with the pig industry. We've got pre-agreed funding of 1% of their GDP, which is $1 billion, and that's up to 10 million. Now that's going to run out pretty quick, and so in discussions with them yesterday in Canberra, we suggested to them that they think if they want to extend that amount to manage ASF. The industry will be represented at the Consultative Committee of Emergency Animal Disease, which makes the decision on how to respond, and they will also be represented at the National Management Group meeting, which funds it. So in that situation, the CC meeting is, I'm the rep for Western Australia, but the pig industry will sit on that, and at the National Management Group, the representative is our Director General or his delegate, and the pig industry also sit on that. There are normal commitments in place for that, which means that you should have your biosecurity arrangements in place for processes, supply chain, that you should have your emergency response arrangements in place for your business, that you should know how to report diseases, and I think a number of those things the pig industry are now working really hard to get in place. In this particular circumstance, ASF is what we call a Category 3, which means that it is cost shared with industry and government 50-50. Foot and mouth disease, because of the big social economic impact, it's actually 80% government and 20% industry. And things like rabies, which have got a human health impact, are 100% government. But if you remember equine influenza, that was 20% government and 80% industry, because primarily it is a disease of production of the horse industry. Cass talked about enhanced border biosecurity, but there's also a lot of work going on around enhanced national preparedness. In AusVet Plan, that's a plan that's on the internet, anyone can look at it. There's a response plan for all the different diseases that are listed in the EADRA, and there's one for African swine fever. So it's currently being updated, and that's a priority, but it is relatively up to date, and it's a guidance document of how we respond. And it talks about how we respond if it's in feral animals or if it's in domestic piggeries, and how you decontaminate and destroy and those types of things. We've set up 4 task groups, and we were having daily teleconferences with industry about what was in place. So where we identified the gaps, we've set up some task groups. So one of the areas in the pig industry, and it may be relevant to the cattle industry as well, is that it's much of their business. If their abattoir goes down, their whole business, whether you've got the disease or not, can't continue to operate. And in a piggery, the pigs just keep getting bigger, and it becomes an animal welfare issue. So Western Australia, I'm leading the National Processing Preparedness Working Group, which will look at how we get a processing plant back up and operating, decontaminate it, what we do about product recall, where we dispose of any product out of the abattoir, and how we deal with all their personnel. There's also a National Feral Pig ASF Response Group, which is being led by Queensland, and WA has got a feral pig expert on that, and also our own Graham Macrath, who is going to put his epidemiology skills to use and look at how the science will work in that space. Oh, I haven't moved, have I? Sorry. Anyway, I'll keep going. What we'll be looking at is the demographics and how the density of pigs and science will move, and whether we actually should be doing. There's always good reason to cull feral pigs. There's never not a good reason to cull feral pigs, but whether ASF is one of them is something that we're going to look at. So I'm not against people saying that feral pigs should be culled. That's logical to me, but I guess using ASF as the reason that we need to get them down hasn't really been the case in Europe, and the only place that they actually use that is where they can actually get the density down to 0, and so they start on the outside of an area and come in and actually control all of the pigs in the area. And trying to do that in Australia, we've done a little bit of costing and modelling on that. It's actually a lot more than that, 10 million, I can tell you that. So, yes. And then there's a national movement control, which as Cass said, how other people might be impacted if there's any movement conditions. But we really have come to the conclusion that movement of trucks and things and roads not going to spread ASF around. ASF is really spread by the movement of pigs and pig products. And, it's not the most infective thing in the world. It's just that pigs that are dead are very infective, and pig products fed to pigs is a very good way of getting them infected. And the last bit is around destruction and disposal and decontamination, and trying to get, as I said, I was in Canberra yesterday, and trying to get 20,000 pigs killed in an abattoir, in a farm, is actually a significant challenge, because they're not the easiest things to kill. And so we're looking at some novel, and we've actually got industry on side looking at some novel ways that we might approach that. And then obviously the disposal of them becomes a challenge as well. As I mentioned, WA, so zoning is really a geographical compartment. So basically, if Western Australia had ASF, then the East Coast would zone us off and say, East Coast is separate to WA, and equally if it goes the other way, we would zone the East Coast off. And so we're looking at a bilateral agreement with Singapore to put that in place, and they're actually quite keen to do it, but there's actually a lot of work to go into doing that. And again, it comes out around verification that you don't have the disease here, that you don't have it in your feral pigs, that you've got regulations in place to stop it coming in, and all those types of things. So where possible, maintaining the markets. And then the other type of concept that is internationally used is compartmentalisation, which means that if it's in the feral pigs, do you actually have your domestic pigs separate to your feral pigs? Do you have enough fencing? Do you have enough biosecurity around it so that you can continue to let them operate, which is how Europe operates. So they have it in their feral pigs, but they use compartmentalisation to say. But they do actually exclude some properties that don't meet the biosecurity standards. So this is what we're working through with industry at the moment. And obviously the big thing about swill feeding, it's illegal to feed swill, but, feral pigs' access to food scraps, farm tips, remote communities, waste, stuff washed up on the beach. Like Cass said, it's pretty hard to think that you can manage all of that. So industry's working really tight at the moment about their on-farm biosecurity. And we're putting a lot of communication out to all pig owners, and it is actually quite amazing. We've got a small number of commercial pig owners, but we seem to have a lot of people with a pet pig. So, trying to get to all of those, we put 2,700 letters out, and very few number came back, but there's a lot of people out there with pet pigs, and I'm sure we didn't get to all of them. And contingency plans in place for the abattoirs. So you've all got a role to play, and Cass went through that, but again, it's basically the border biosecurity, and it does fascinate me that people say to me they don't really think it's a threat coming in, and for a long time Australia never tested any product because they said, well, it's illegal to bring it in and it's irrelevant if it's got it in there or not, but testing it has certainly sort of crystallised the thinking of a number of people around the risks to Australia. So the last one more slide, sorry. So our structure is finalised, and just want to make comment on that, and it was presented to our staff on the 17th of October. I came back to DPIRD in June last year, and it was imminent then, so it's taken a long time, a lot longer than we expected, and the staff have had to be pretty resilient because it's been a lot of uncertainty on them and whether they would have jobs or not. Aquatic biosecurity has come into biosecurity, both the marine pests and aquatic health. Interstate border biosecurity, the operations, has gone into the operations and compliance area. But the policy on border, setting the conditions, will remain with the biosecurity area. Animal welfare operations, so the old LCU staff, will go into the operations and compliance program, but animal welfare policy and legislation remains with biosecurity. So it's more sort of a policy operations split in some areas. All of the staff that are permanent have been placed in the new structure or know the outcome of their position, and we're now in the process of filling the vacant positions, and you'll probably see that there's a number of vacancies out on the website at the moment. It's a lot of work because it's been probably 2.5 years since we've had permanent filling of jobs. From an animal biosecurity perspective, we're moving resources between the regions. Our Geraldton veterinary position's been vacant since the beginning of the year or late last year, and that's been filled now on the 28th, and that Andrew Larkins has moved there, and he will cover the Pilbara region. Very, very good cattle vet, and quite keen to get out and meet people. And we are putting additional livestock, animal welfare and biosecurity resources into the Kimberley, and some of those positions are being advertised. So that's it for me. Sorry.